So thank you, Sarah. I'm excited for this afternoon of talks. I am the Artemis Science Flight Operations Lead out of SMD, and I'm going to be talking to you today about how we are integrating science into operations across Artemis. So next chart, please, Kristen. Okay, so you've probably seen that picture on the right side several times, many times. You'll note that science there is an Artemis exploration pillar, and as such, we are integrated across the operation structure in multiple ways. To that end, we are basically dividing science and utilization operations in Artemis across both the Johnson Space Center and the Flight Operations Directorate, and the Marshall Space Flight Center, and the Payload and Mission Operations Division. Jason Briggs is going to be giving a really amazing overview of PMOD and their capabilities in the next chart. So for the bulk of this 10 minutes, I'm going to focus kind of on the lunar science and geology component of this, knowing that Jason is then going to follow up with a deep dive into PMOD. So the JSC-based flight control team is responsible for EVA, which is extravehicular activity, payload preparation and deployment, planetary observation, so looking out of the Orion spacecraft down at the moon, for example, lunar science and geology related to EVAs, and managing the lunar samples from the time they are collected to the time they are safely back on Earth. PMOD is responsible for other utilization that will be taking place inside the vehicle, science preparation of EVA payloads, and operations of payloads post-deployment. So again, Jason's going to deep dive into their structure and how they support operations down at PMOD for those functions. And I'll share more details on the sort of JSC side of the house for the lunar science and geology. So we do have a new flight controller position for Artemis, starting with Artemis 2, called the Science Officer. I'll deep dive into that in a second. We also have the primary science backroom for lunar science and geology, which is called the SIR, the Science Evaluation Room. That is a newly constructed facility in Mission Control in Houston. And I'll show you some pictures and status of that in this talk. Next chart, please. Thanks, Kristen. Okay, so here is sort of a graphical representation of that. In Houston, you have the flight control room, which is the mission control front room in Houston that you may have seen if you've seen pictures of, for example, the International Space Station front room. There will be an equivalent for Artemis missions. The science officer for Artemis 2 will be sitting in that room. Below that, they will be supported by the Science Evaluation Room, which is the real brain trust of the lunar scientists and geologists and other support functions. And we also have a JSC Astromaterials owned and operated facility called the Science Mission Operations Room, which will provide support to the SIR for real-time operations. Next chart, please. Okay, so the science officer, like I said, is a new flight controller position, a new front room position that will migrate to the EVA back room during EVAs on Artemis 3. The science officer is ultimately the flight controller that is responsible for planetary observations. Like I said, this would be like picture the Artemis 2 crew in Orion observing the moon. EVA-related surface science and lunar sample management. This is an SMD position that sits within JSC Flight Ops that is staffed by lunar scientists and geologists. And I'm really excited to announce our science officers today. So for Artemis 2, your science officers will be myself, Angela Garcia, and Trevor Graff. Angela and Trevor are both based out of the Johnson Space Center. And for Artemis 3, given the longer mission and the surface activities requiring a significant amount of work on our science officers, we have myself, Angela, and Trevor, as well as Sheree Ackles and Marie Henderson, both from the Goddard Space Flight Center. So congratulations to all of you, and know that your science officers will be working as hard as we possibly can to represent the lunar science and geology communities during these missions. Then we have the SIR, which I'm really excited about. It is the Science Evaluation Room. It is, like I said, to be the primary science backroom for our lunar science and geology objectives. It is a newly constructed facility in Building 30, which is the Mission Control Center building at the Johnson Space Center. You can see a picture taken probably a couple months ago there of the room. It should be ready for operations here pretty shortly. And then the JSC Astromaterials Group, code XI down at JSC, owns and operates and has developed a new facility called the Science Mission Operations Room. And this will basically provide support to the SIR during operations for some additional analysis capabilities. Next chart, please. Okay, so the SIR. This is the room that I'm sure all of you are excited to hear about. This is the room where the Lunar Science and Geology Science team will operate during Artemis missions to support those objectives. We have implemented a SIR in several different mission simulations. Shown in the upper right picture is the Jet 5 SIR, which was an analog test we ran last year. The overall responsibility of the SIR is responsible for providing real-time tactical science feedback during operations that include those objectives, as well as strategic science oversight over, those portions of the missions, the lunar science and geology objectives. And NOAA put together that great image mosaic of the Apollo 17 geology backroom to show, where we're building from. Next chart, please. Okay, so where are we with the SIR development? Really cool fun fact, I think, is that the Artemis SIR will be located in an old Apollo computer room. So really wonderful legacy there. We will be in the SIR for Artemis 2, and I'll talk about Artemis 2 a little bit later today. The Artemis SIR will be more sort of open concepts surrounded by what you think of as a traditional mission control console. So you can sort of see that in the picture on the top right, where there's like more open tables rather than just like rows and rows and rows of consoles to enable science dialogue. Like I said, the SIR will be supported by that Science Mission Operations Room in Building 36 at JSC, not too far from Mission Control. They'll be providing additional functions like image processing, sample support, GIS support, and more. The SIR will also have connectivities to some other mission support teams on center. The image analysis team supports across multiple mission elements, but we'll be tying into them as well. Next chart, please. Okay, so I'll just wrap up here. And I'm hoping that this talk is essentially like a good overview of what this operation structure will look like, so that when you see updates from Artemis 2 and Artemis 3, and I know many of you are interested in conducting analog tests that do pull on high fidelity Artemis structures, I'm hopeful that this information can provide sort of a scaffolding for you to understand how science is being integrated from an operations perspective across Artemis. So JSC based, Johnson Space Center based, Houston based science operations will focus on planetary observations, which I'll talk more about in a few minutes, EVA related surface science. So, what the crew is doing in terms of exploration and geology during an EVA, deployment of the EVA payloads themselves, so like while the crew members are suited and deploying the payloads, and then the life cycle of lunar samples to make sure that, we have eyes on those lunar samples from start to finish. You're going to hear a lot more about Marshall and PMOD. I intentionally did not include that content here because Jason has a really wonderful pitch prepared to share with you. But Marshall-based utilization operations will focus on other payloads, other utilization payloads, IVA in particular, operations of payloads after they've been deployed on EVA. As well as operations of untended payloads mounted on HLS. And again, he'll go into the structure of that team here in a minute. Science officer is our Artemis flight controller position for lunar science and geology, and that will be staffed by SMD lunar scientists and geologists who are trained and certified by flight operations to sit in mission control. They will be funneling information from the science evaluation room, the lunar science and geology back room that reports through the science officer on tactical science priorities during an active science investigation, whether that be orbital or EVA, and providing sort of strategic science over the mission. Are we accomplishing all of our science objectives? What do we need to do to make sure we get all of those done by the end of the mission? And then they'll be backed up by the SMORE, the deliciously named SMORE Science Mission Operations Room in Building 36. This structure has been tested a lot already in a variety of simulations. Jet 3 and Jet 5 were two analog tests that were run in the last couple of years that have been outbriefed at previous iterations of the LSSW. Matthew Miller will be giving a great talk. Encourage you to listen in on a simulation we did last fall where we learned about this entire structure. And I just wanted to end with, science really is a fundamental pillar of Artemis. And as such, we are integrated across the operations structure. And the operations community has been very welcoming in integrating us throughout that structure. With that, I'll leave it to the next presenter to talk about Marshall and Piedmont. Thanks.